Oh, I was curious how everybody's doing this morning.
I'm doing good. You're in a new location.
I'm in the same one that I was last week. I just don't have this weird disco light thing on above me. Yeah.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah. Andrew, welcome to TCL
Good
23.
morning.
Oh yeah,
Hi, Andrew.
excited to be here.
Good.
Well, without wasting any time, because we've been on track for hitting our hour the last couple weeks, so let's make sure we stick there. Let's hop right into demos. So we've got Anna and Jessica and Zenzi and James, and you two groups can fight over who wants to demo first.
I mean, I already got everything set up, so if y'all are good, I'll start us off.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica.
No problem. All right. Let's jump into this. Why do I have that up? All right, welcome. So this week, Anna and I were tasked with the following. As a user, I want to filter my shopping list to make it easier to locate an item on the list. The following is the acceptance criteria that we were working with. First one here, display a text field above the shopping, on the top of the shopping list. I already have a list here with using the token that we included in our testing criteria on our pull request. So I have that loaded up here already. So as you can see, the first one here, we do have a text field above the top of our shopping list. For the following three, as the user types into the field, the list should narrow to display only items that contain the text the user entered into the filter field. When the field has text in it, the user should be able to tap a UI element. An example would be an X button next to the field to clear the field. And then the filter text should match any part of the item name, meaning that it should not only match from the start of the string. So as you can see here, we have a few items in our list. Let's kind of zone in on goldfish and fish, for example. So if I start typing gold, we're only going to get goldfish. If I start typing fish, it will bring up both fish as well as goldfish, which starts in the middle of the string. If I want, I can go ahead and click that reset text field, and it does clear the field there. A couple other items on here just for demo. We got blue for blueberries, but we can do berries and bring everything up there. I believe we also, if a user accidentally puts a space in the beginning and then starts typing, they will still be able to get the items that are being, or the items that match to what's being typed in there. Other than that, Anna, did you want to discuss kind of what we, with the, what was it, the use state that we were discussing earlier?
Yeah, no, I was just going to highlight a little bit how the filtering happens. So we keep track of what's going on in the input field through the use state hook. So we know what's in the input field, what the value is with our const query, which is on line 11. And whenever we have to update it, we use set query. And then way below, I think it's on line 90 something. Yeah, no, it's actually 62. Okay, sorry about that. No, that's when the filtering actually happens. It's right before we render our list. So we go over the item names that we already have in our database, and we use the includes method to see if we can find, we find our query and whether it matches one of the item names we already have, or if it's an empty string, then it will just return all the list items. And then after we have that happen, the filtering, then we render all the results on the screen.
Does anybody have any questions or Any clarifications?
I
needed?
have a question. If you add an item that has capital letters and then search for it, is it going to work?
Yep, so it is set up so that,
Actually, what I mean is to add an item to the grocery list that has a capital in it.
oh, yeah, definitely.
And, yeah.
So let's go ahead, we'll add, I don't even remember what's on here now. Oh yeah, I already have milk on there, sorry. We'll do
You have
almond
chocolate milk? Oh, okay, that's a good one.
Sorry, I already started. We could do almond milk. So if we have almond milk there, aha,
Oh.
Yeah, I thought I saw that in the code. That it would look like you were only lowercasing the search, not the
got
item
it.
name.
I thought that, okay, yeah, that's a good point, because I guess I was remembering, I thought that we were,
Yeah,
I
I
thought
thought we
something
were
previous
saving
were
things
lowercasing.
in. I thought we were saving things in lowercase only. That's why we stuck to lowercase.
Okay, okay.
So
Okay.
the acceptance
can look
criteria on
into
the
that.
previous issue was to save it as the user inputs, but when you're doing the
Oh.
comparison to check to see if the item already lists, then you lowercase and kind of otherwise sterilize both the input and the database, but you're not supposed to like change the database.
Got it. So that is something that we could put on our extra credit when if someone has time to do
Mhm.
kind of list potentially, right? To
Yeah, we
accommodate-
certainly we do have a column on our issues board
Mhm.
for these, so feel free to go ahead and track that there.
Nice.
Cool, awesome. Any other
If-
questions?
If you search for the exclamation points, is it going to work? You're not stripping out.
Yep.
Or you? Yeah. Okay. Cool. I saw
Yep.
another group that was stripping out like all punctuation and that kind of thing, but that's
Oh,
cool.
okay.
That works. Great. It looks really good.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right.
This certainly isn't for this, but what you'll see a lot in production systems is sometimes it can be jarring to have whatever your input is directly linked immediately to what's showing. So there's these fun things like debounce and a variety of other ways that you can like wait for the user for a certain amount of time, like wait for their input to stop until it actually conducts it. Another reason for that is for like APIs. So you don't want to, if you're making a request on an API endpoint based on the input, you don't want to be like new letter, fire a new request, new letter, fire a new request. You might like wait till the user's reasonably entered something. It could be like a compound thing. It could be like they've entered at least 3 letters and they've waited, they haven't typed anything in the last half second or second, and then it'll fire the request. Again, not something for this, but just made me think of it, because you can, and then you might have the kind of whole thing opens up. You could have some CSS that maybe would like delay and have things animate in that list to kind of give the user a feel of when it, what's leaving, what's entering. Yeah. But that's outside of the scope of today.
Skylar, has nothing to do with what we're doing today, but that reminds me, and I want to ask you about, so just remind me to talk to you later about forcing like load time when we're requesting, so that like when you create or update something in the database and your connection is really fast and the screen goes like that, and that's really weird looking, but when you create your load or whatever you want, do people force their modal or loader or whatever it is to stay open longer, even if the request happens much faster, just so visually it like doesn't look so weird and jarring?
I'm kind of curious what other people would say on this. What my quick answer would be creating artificial like magic number weights is probably a bad idea. You'll see it, but it's probably a bad idea, and it's indicative of you should like loop a designer in to be like, hey, how should we actually back up and look at this whole thing? Because I think we've all been at a website where it's showing some like, we're arbitrarily thinking, and you're like, I know you're not actually thinking. There's nothing being done here. You're just making it feel like something important is happening, and that's not a great user experience.
Okay, I was wondering
Well,
though,
I admit to doing that myself on this this link that I put in here, which is like, it's just too, like, it's like get a random number. It's like, well, I'm going to be very serious about getting a random number. So I'm going to make a little loader show up for 100 milliseconds or something when it's actually instant. But
Okay, right, right. It just, when I was building out something recently, I was noticing that I could always test different connections with the dev tools, that it just looks really crazy with like a really fast connection. It's like something blinks, something blinks on your screen and then goes away, and you're like, what was that? So
There, don't want to go down too far down the rabbit trail, but there is a functionality in the network tab in Chrome and other browsers where you can artificially slow down your connection. So that's really great, because when you're thinking about user experience, a lot of the times developers, what do we have? We probably have very high percentile internet connection relative to your user base. So you can go ahead in the network, I believe it's in the network tab that says no throttling. You can click down on it and do fast 3G, slow 3G. You can also do this at the application level. There's I don't know what the latest and greatest is, but for a long time, the funniest and most useful way to slow down your application was a GitHub repo called Comcast, which is a bit of a jab at Comcast, and that way you could slow down your application, and there was a variety of configuration parameters there. So that can be nice to, like, you hear about projects like Facebook in India. They have like a Facebook Lite because they don't want to use up all of their customers' data by auto fetching everything, because in India they pay per kilobyte. So so there you might, if you didn't think about your customers in this extreme example, like Indian mobile phones that charge per kilobyte, you might make something that's very image heavy, and that might break. It might totally not work for your customers. So anyhow,
Jessica, I just wanted to point out one other thing I really liked about your code is that you're searching against you're filtering against the list that's in memory, as opposed to, like, I've seen teams fire a database request every time for every keystroke and that kind of thing. So and just like bust through like our quota limits and whatever, and just in their testing. So that was smart. That was a good way to approach it.
Yeah, I think Anna, I think you were the one that initially suggested that. So, but yeah, it ended up working out really slick for what we needed to do.
cool.
that's great. Well, should we move over? Zenzi, James, love to see what y'all did this week.
Do you want to talk about it, Zenzi?
No, thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So let's get to the, I think I found it. I think it's under this link actually. So if I pull, okay, great. So this is our PR, and I'm going to look at the issues too, I guess. That's my fault, because it doesn't have it. Closed issues number 8, I believe. No, that's not correct. Is it number 10? Yes. Okay, sorry guys. When a purchase is recorded, the estimated number of days until the next purchase date should be calculated and recorded in the database. Okay, so we found out this morning that we are not sending up the days in the database. I've got the database open here. This is what we're currently recording here is a snapshot of milliseconds, and on initial mark purchase, you're only it's just millisecond. It's the estimated days converted to milliseconds. And I was in sort of the process, I think, yesterday of trying to figure out through Yenli's suggestions what exactly I'm trying to send up. I never really intended for this to hit fully yet, but let's see here. We can take a look at it. Maybe I'll go to this link. Actually, I don't know if I still have that console log in there, but we'll create a new item. Let me see what I'm going to go through here. It's called Pew Biggs Lucy. Okay, we can test out this functionality. All right, and if we add an item, and banana, I don't know, and we click check. Well, first of all, let's see that it's in the database. Okay, so nothing. So the only thing that we store initially is the user's purchase frequency. So what's going to happen when we hit click is we are going to send back the, and I can show you the code in a second. That 7 days converted to milliseconds. Why did I choose to do that? We've just been working with milliseconds for everything else, and so I thought maybe when it comes time to push it into our last calculate estimate function that we get with the code already in our library, that we would want to be able to just keep it consistent. But if we need to convert it to days in the database and then reconvert it to milliseconds or however, that's fine with me. So estimates this is what you're looking at when you your return value from this is going to be pulled. Well, let's actually, I'd rather just show you in the list component, I suppose. It's a little bit easier to wrap your brain around. Okay, so there's a lot going on in here. I don't know what that is yet. Is this something that you guys maybe added? Okay.
Yeah, actually that was when merging yesterday, I forgot to delete that. So that commented code on 23 and 24 just needs to be legit deleted.
Okay, cool. No, okay, so initial interval, like I said, is the item's purchase frequency. That's that 7, 14, or 30 times this, which converts it to milliseconds. And the latest interval will be on any subsequent checking of the box, and it will take in the last purchased minus the current timestamp, because now last purchased, let's see, look at the database, will have a timestamp. On initial it's null. We initialize it to null. So then that's what we use from then on to check against the last estimate here. So what I do here is if the item is checked, then you can run this function. Otherwise, we can't. And if the first time is 0, we're going to use the initial interval that we use here. And we just need to convert this to days, it looks like, which right now it is just, I mean, I can just literally just take out the times, whatever. And we can, I guess when we insert it back into the function, this one here, calculate estimate, we can turn it back into milliseconds. Honestly, I'm not even sure if that's what we need to do, if I'm being 100% honest. It's weird for me to try to like explain this code when I'm not fully understanding exactly what we're looking for. So
it's kind of a good segue to this issue. Like, I think we should create an issue because we have a bug. We're not meeting the acceptance criteria, and we should have a discussion in that issue so that the entire team understands, so that we have to understand the issue before we can fix the issue. So getting a consensus and then finding a way forward, like getting the code fix and then reviewing it, so we don't have things like comments sticking around or functionality. Because the more eyes, the better. I make mistakes. I usually get a few people to review my code. So sorry, continue.
So, I mean, that's okay. I mean, other than that, I mean, if there's more than one, or if it's already been checked, if it's not equal to 0, it will just run this with the latest interval, which we calculate through current timestamp minus last item data dot last purchased, and then after that, it'll just always run that and increase the purchase count by 1. I mean, I guess it increases the purchase count by 1 each time. But is this an appropriate time to talk about what we need to fix or wrap our brain around? Or
let's talk about it in a second. Let's just let's open the floor for anybody who has questions about the code. I guess I'll start with one. I'm probably missing something obvious, but what's our magic number up at the top on line 20, the 86 and like 864 and a bunch of zeros?
That just takes like a day and converts it to, that's how many milliseconds are in a day.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah,
it looked familiar, but it's drawn a blank.
Right. Yeah.
And if I recall correctly, the millisecond angle that you all chose think it would have been the previous week, was due to that January 1st, 1970 thing.
Mhm.
And that was that Unix. Is that how you? Okay.
It's just date. It's just whatever this gives you. That date.now gives you the current amount of milliseconds that have elapsed since 1970 January 1st, and we just found that to be a really nice, clean number to check against. We were doing that when we were that's what we converted. That's what we used to decide how many hours have passed since an item was checked, and if it's less than 24, it stays checked, and if it's more than 24, you can recheck it.
Right. Okay. Cool. Thanks for
Mhm.
refreshing my brain.
That's kind of that's a little piece of like software arcana, is just that Unix systems give you that like their timestamps are in seconds. In JavaScript, it's in milliseconds. So you always have to do that conversion of multiplying by 1,000. But so the acceptance criteria kind of, they do say that it needs to be stored in days. But if it's, it's, there are different ways to represent time, right? And so what I'm curious about is, were you able to verify that, if you make another purchase at a later date, like maybe backdate what's in the database or something, you make another purchase, is it updating that interval correctly? And if so, then this is maybe less of a problem than like it's maybe not exactly how it was envisioned to be done, but if it's still working the same way, it's
I think so. Yesterday I sat there with my calculator and I was, I had disabled the ability to check it again if it's before 24 hours, and just seeing what I came up with, and it looked like I was getting what I was estimating with my calculator how much time had actually passed in terms of minutes. I would wait like 10 minutes and hit it again, but it doesn't give you obviously the exact difference. It gives you an average of the two. So the only thing that I'm not like, where I'm struggling, I guess, is using the look at the database so we can be on the same page, using this purchase frequency 7, or maybe it's let's see if I have a different one. No, I guess I've just always used the same. Yeah, using it this 30 or whatever, using this as the initial value for calculating our last estimate on when times purchase is equal to 0. So is that what Yinli was trying to explain to me in the PRs, and so I was trying to get like on the same page as it is what she was saying, but I still didn't really understand if that's exactly what we're looking for, in terms of if nothing is purchased and you as the user just think that you're going to buy something in 30 days and you mark purchased whenever, like if it's in the next day or the next like 50 days, right? This number will be translated to milliseconds. That's I think that's what that is in milliseconds. And in terms of 30 times 806, whatever that number is, 86 million. No, this number is 8,640,000 times 30 gives you this. So is that
which
correct?
That's kind of the intention of having that, what you store in the database, be in days, because it is so hard to reason about milliseconds.
Right. Sure. I know there are a lot of different ways to go about this in terms of like, I'm assuming some people probably like converted this to an actual like, month, day, week, or whatever, wherever they use, whatever. So I just wanted feedback on what you guys think. Is that correct to have the initial one be this?
I think like what Andrew said is, if it works, then it's, correct to some degree. But I'd say also highlighted by kind of the discussion we're having is you've broken out a calculator and there's still confusion. So it's not like the developer ergonomics, like the ability to debug is requiring a lot of gymnastics. And so maybe in that regard, refactoring this so it's days, like that way you can look at a record and, this number, you've got a like the last estimate is a millisecond since between 2 time periods. So you're representing days really. And then last purchase is a date stamp since 1970. So that's a little easier to understand. And then you can like add them together and get another date stamp. But if you had this restructured a little bit as like maybe a date, like a human readable one, and then also the number of days, then like looking at it, you'd be able to spot check and be like, oh yeah, cool, like 13 days is the last estimate.
Okay.
Sweet. All right, last purchased on this date. That makes sense. It's not like 1962 is a negative date stamp or something crazy, you know.
Right.
So the ability to debug, but if it works, it works. So there's two arguments to be made there.
Okay. I feel like if I convert this to days, then I'll have to go back and convert a lot of things in the code. So which I may not fully know how to do. So
this is where I would recommend using like a time package to use, like day.js or date.fns, I think, to help you with that. I use day.js.
okay.
Also, I think the good thing about having Andrew on this call is Andrew is the author of the estimate function. So
my apologies.
So,
I know it's not the easiest thing to understand,
but it would help to clarify, right? Like the way that
Right.
I wrap my head around. So I want to make sure that this is not like, oh, it's the answer, but the way I wrap my head around in terms of how estimates are being made, as in the milk example, right? Like when I tell the app that I typically buy this in 14 days, and every 2 weeks I do my shopping. But let's say within a week, my son drinks it all and I buy it. And I buy a new one in a week. And then 2 days later, he spills the whole gallon and I have to buy it again. So is it as I'm buying it more frequent, that estimate number is getting smaller? So that's where it will help if Andrew can clarify.
Right. So it's okay that we just trust the user to input whatever, and we'll just use that initial number to start calculating our estimate.
Yeah, that first number when they add the item, that you could use that as, you know, to kind of like in this coming week, you're going to be sorting the list by, you know, the estimate, like the number of estimated days until the purchase. So
right.
You could use that for that first one. It's a weighted average. So I came up with this formula when I built this app for myself 2 years ago, or whatever. I came up with this because I didn't want to be adding a record of every single purchase. So this is a way that you only need those 3 data points to figure out what the next estimate should be. So the number of times that it's purchased, and that's basically an average, but then whatever the last interval is counts like 2 of the previous items. So it's just weighted a little bit towards the most recent purchase. And then you average across all of those. And so that's a little, you know, like kind of the idea with this story is that you're given somebody else's code that's not necessarily, it's a little bit opaque, has some comments, it's maybe not super apparent how to work with it, but it's a little bit of a black box, right? Like you give it the inputs and you trust that it's going to give you the right kind of output. So yeah, I guess like what I kind of see in your code is that they're like, like a databases give you sort of a native date time format usually that you can use, and then you like usually some functions that you can use to kind of convert back and forth. So JavaScript gives you that, the date object, right? And it has different formats, you know, to locale string and whatever. So working as much with the like kind of, I think of this, I don't know if Judo is really the right term for this, but like kind of, you know, in Judo you work with the other person's momentum to make something happen. So kind of working with the tools and kind of within what the tools give you. So, you know, like in Firestore, you know, they have a date time type. So just tell it, you know, it's kind of stuffing a date in there and letting it figure out like keep track of what that type is. And then you're able to kind of pull that out. And like Yunli was saying, you know, maybe use a library to convert that into days or something, or add a number of days to it. Would be a kind of a nice pattern, as opposed to like trying to manage all the math yourself.
Sure.
It can get tricky.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's been tricky, so.
Yeah. Dates are one of the hardest things to work with, though, so it's totally understandable.
Right.
I'll throw something in the channel, but it's reminding me of a video. Like dates are hard, and it's talking about programming, and it goes into ridiculous depth about how it's been like the bane of software developers since the beginning of software development. But yeah, I think we should probably, is everybody comfortable with the code review here? Because we are halfway into our time. We have a lot to do, including a learning module.
I'm good.
Cool.
Yeah, nice work,
Well,
y'all.
Yeah, awesome job, both teams. Yeah, it seems like I like the cadence. We talked in our retro about kind of getting that early week cadence, and so we're ready for code review. Even though we had a couple of hiccups, I think we're trending in the right direction, and it was really cool to see that like early and midweek collaboration. And it seems like everybody kind of balanced their time well, as based on the little anecdotes that I'm hearing. So that makes me happy. And yeah, Yenli, are you on the learning module this week?
Yes, communication. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you. I always have a hard time moving my bar of people's streams. Like I need to see faces. But okay, so let me start. And if you don't see my screen, let me know. So communication for devs, and this is a pretty important topic. I think when you watch movies of engineers and software, hackers, it's like they're all in this small little room just like typing away, and they're creating all these amazing things. But the reality of working in software engineering is not just code, it's communication. So communication is key, and this is very important. And how effective a team is definitely how we communicate and how we collaborate. And for teams that, you can definitely feel the dynamics of how effective and productive a team is based on the communication. So the different ways that we communicate as a developer is documentation. Documentation, why we do it. So the thing is, it's important to document what did I do again, because you will definitely forget it. I forget code that I write last week. Writing things down help you learn. It's something to come back to. Sometimes it seems like, oh, I'm spending so much time writing this, but you're creating that muscle memory. It's a great tool for revisiting big decisions. It's things that, especially with this technology and how fast things are going and working in a team, it's good to really go back to like, oh, what did we decide on this? And I'm sure you see in this experience and stuff like, what were the decisions we decided on last week? So it's really helpful for onboarding new team members as well when, we want to create documentation so that when someone joins the team, there will be times that you can sit down and onboard them and chat about things, but in this conversation, you're not going to remember everything. So having a one-drop place for these things that are documented, anybody can always come back to and make sure that we are all on the same page. And avoids like institutional knowledge where it's like when, let's say you have a team of 4 that's been working on this, they have all this knowledge, and sometimes life happens and you don't know what can happen, right? Sometimes people can leave abruptly, or if, anything bad happen and you lose a team member, then they leave with that knowledge. And now the rest of the team is struggling to figure out, oh, what does half of the code base do? And the amount of time that you need to go back and read it and figure out what to do and refactoring, it's going to be really difficult. So definitely documentation is very important. It also empowers all team members to be on the same page. And that is very essential to being effective. So quick tips for how to write really good documentation. So you want to write for the person who knows the least, right? Like you want to be clear and thorough, but you also want to optimize for the person who needs a quick reference, because just the way when we're working, the nature of our job is that, there's just not enough time for everything. So if it's something that I come back to and do a quick scan and find what I need, then there's a higher chance of someone using the documentation. So use examples and visuals, and then also making it accessible. So thinking about where you would put your documentation, like for engineering workflows and stuff, like at my last company, we have Confluence for more of writing engineering processes. What are the Git flows, especially As the project gets more complicated and there's going to be multiple branching, like there's going to be a potential dev branch, a QA branch, and then feature branches. How you merge to different things can get really complicated, and there's a high risk of creating more bugs and merge conflicts. So a lot of that documentation should sit in Confluence or a determined place. I think a lot of more recent companies use Notion to manage that in terms of writing down workflows and such, and documentation that you normally would write for, like, for like our project right now, when you how to set up the project, right? Like if you look at our GitHub repo, there's a README file that talks about how to spin up your project, how to how to spin it up, how to set up the database, how to do all these things. That normally sits with your repo, so that it's quick and easy. You don't have to go to another system to find it. And then I think one really good, how do I get out of this? Sorry. So I needed to escape from that just to show you. So one really good example of documentation is React Router. So if you go on their site, the way that it's written, everything on the left, the way it's structured, like you have the example code, a really basic example of how to do it. My connection seems to be slow. Yeah, so here there's like code sandbox and it runs, you could type into it. That's really great. So you could see like what happens if I make a little change in this. Let's go back to quick start guide. And then here, just in terms of the writing and then the code that corresponds to exactly what you need to do. Like I found this to be super helpful when I was learning how to use Framer Motion as well. They have a same format where I'm looking at this and I know exactly like, oh, so this is the code that I can copy and play around and test, and that works really well. Let's see, so going back to the presentation, the other part in how we communicate is through our pull requests. So this one is especially essential and important because pull requests, is how we get our code to production. And in other situations, it's also when you're working on big feature branches that, let's say, multiple teams are pushing to that feature branch, and then from that feature branch, it needs to go to main. So there's different ways of getting to production. It's important. So for pull requests, like why we want to give reviewers context on your code, right? So in working, a lot of times we're going to be super busy and we're all kind of stuck working on really hard problems. And when you're creating your pull request, you need to make sure that your reviewer is going to quickly see, oh, okay, so this is the context. This set of code that is changing is addressing that. So it needs to be clear, and you want to help your reviewers to walk through your code, right? So if they can quickly walk through, then they can review it, approve it, and move on. Because at the end of the day, typical work situation is you will have a lot of things on your plate. And if you're able to structure your pull request to help your reviewer to just go through that as quickly as possible, then there's a higher chance of your pull request getting approved and then done, and you can merge. So it's a way to make friends. It's a way to earn trust. People are more inclined to give you feedback and spend time reviewing your code when they see that it's a really well-written pull request. And another part of it is in interviewing, talking and walking through your code, having a really robust PR description helps your future self remember what you did. So let's say a month from now, you have a job interview, and one of the popular things that happens now is, they will ask you, share a project that you worked on, and then you send them the project. And during the day of onsite is, hey, let's talk through what you build, and they're going to have questions for you in terms of like, why did you do this? What are the trade-offs? Like, what does this particular code here do? What does this function do? So having these PR descriptions and just like self-documenting and self-code review is to remind yourself what you did, so that a month from now you can open up the PR and talk through it and have really good discussions with your interviewer. Let's see. So how? And I think most of you are already doing this, but I just want to highlight some of the things that that could improve as well. So like screenshots, GIFs, and videos. I really love that the team's already doing that already. And then links to resources and permalinks to code you reference. So like Firebase, you know, or certain tutorials that you found like, oh, do it this way. As a reviewer, I won't have any context, right? Like my head has been deep in the issues that I'm working on. So if you provide the link there and I see, oh, it needs to do this, and I'm not really sure, I click on it, I look at it, oh, right, okay, I understand now. Then it's higher chance of me to not have to switch and Google things. Then I would be like, okay, I understand, I'm going to approve it. And the other part that I think we didn't address, and it's better to address now, is that you want to keep your PR small and narrowly scoped, right? So a couple of weeks back, I made a mistake of like, oh, in this PR also fix this. So that was a faux pas on my part, as in like, oh no, we want our PRs to be small and address one issue, so that when you merge it and it gets done, you can move on to the next thing. So it makes the reviewing time quicker as well, so that you wouldn't be spending hours on it. And I think, and a good example of this, so sorry about that, is, I think this one, I'll share the slides afterwards so you can dig deeper into it, but this is a PR that Stacy did a long time back, I think in 2019. So here, like the type of changes, acceptance criteria, the description, it's reflective of what the code changed. So another thing that I also want to highlight is when you're in your draft PR and you're writing this, when you switch to, when you set this as for final review, it's a good idea to come back and check to make sure that what you've written, your description, lines up with what your changes are, it reflects your current changes so that it doesn't create any confusion. Anytime that your PR description creates confusion, then that means the more time your reviewer needs to spend on it, and that's counterproductive to how we work, right? So we want to be able to give this, and I also love this part, the to-dos and the notes that I've seen in your PRs as well, is in like, oh yeah, we were kind of confused about this, but you know, or we decided like certain trade-offs and decisions. It really helps to call this out, so I know that, oh, okay, so in these set of changes, it's not going to address this, and that I'm going to trust that this person will handle this later on. And that's, and this is where it comes back to how you earn trust with your team members by setting up your PRs like this. So now let's go back to the presentation. And then comments and codes. So this is also another way to communicate, you know, not to call on James, but earlier you had that big number, right? Like, what does that number really mean? Right now you remember, but let's say if James was sick today and he wasn't here and we're looking at his code, all of us is going to scratch our head and go, oh, what does that big number mean? So it would be helpful to have a comment that really tells us what that is for and why. So then code comments should give your team more context behind the code, and it helps reviewers understand while they're actively tracing your code. So you don't want to have too much, but you want to have a little bit so that as they're tracing through, they understand. And then you want to answer questions that the code itself doesn't, because you don't want your code to be too verbose. It helps to have self-documenting comments. I think the how. So this part I think is really important, is to focus on why, not like, oh, this is equal to this. Like your code is already saying that. You want to tell people why you're doing something. And I think this one is a really good example. So if you look at this one from Reach UI, the code comments here is, this function is pretty straightforward, but if you read this comment, it says, if multiple is set to true, we need to make sure the default index is an array and vice versa. We'll handle console logs in our prop types, but this will at least keep the component from blowing up. So that's really important to know when you're using this. So definitely, like, these kind of comments is important to put in. And one thing is, one of our other mentor, Lewis, shared a really great tech talk that Sarah Drasner did. It's the art of code comments. So Sarah Drasner is very well known, and she's a core maintainer of Vue.js. And if you look at Vue.js documentation, it's just like very well written. It's very clear. And I think there's also a CSS tricks article on it in terms of how, like, she explained her choices and why it's written that way. She's very well known for technical writing. So I definitely recommend watching this. I'll share this in the channel. I watched and I was like, oh, it was a fun watch, and it was also stuff that I learned as well. I thought it was pretty cool. Let's see, what else? So what else? How are other ways that we communicate, right? So we highlight the three big things in terms of, documentation, PRs, and such, but communication happens outside of that as well, right? In our issues, where you can leave comments. Comments are a way to clarify acceptance criteria. It's where things get captured. And other than clarifying issues as well, clarifying acceptance criteria, a lot of times when you're updating, when it's in progress, when it's done for review, when it's ready to merge, all those things are communicating to your team your status, and that's important. GitHub doesn't do it, but the other things that are being used is the other application is Jira. So in Jira, when you update your statuses, certain people can get notifications, so they can keep up to date what is happening in your issue, especially if you're building a bigger feature. Those things are important to make sure that as you're working through your issues, to update your status so that you're signaling to the rest of your team where you're at. For GitHub, we don't have blocked, but in Jira and in past work experiences, there is an issue of being blocked, right? So if you ever encounter a time where you don't understand something, you're not getting the acceptance criteria, it's very important to put your issue in blocked to let the rest of the team know where you're at, because that signals to the team, I need help or I need clarification from the PM. It's a workflow that will help you work better. It's a process that I can go more into detail, that when working with difficult PMs, you want to use this process to protect your time as well. Because how long an issue sits in blocked state matters to the team overall, because it could mean missing a release date because of that. And then in our project board, so I want to point out, so in our project board, this as well is a communication tool, right? The things that we're working on, the things that are in progress. Sometimes your hiring manager or leadership will come in and look through this and get a sense of, instead of checking with everybody, they can come in here and look and go, oh, they know where things are moving. Same as a PM, they would know what are some things that are in the backlog. Those are things that are important to communicate. And then retro boards, which you've been experiencing in terms of, it's a really good team building type thing where it's like you're showing appreciation, you're acknowledging things that went well and things that need to improve. And through that, we learn and create action items on how we can do better for the next release, right? So a lot of times I think in the past, like having retro sessions is really helpful to help the team improve and the productivity and such. And then Slack and Team, I think it's a Microsoft thing, it's the equivalent of Slack, is how you communicate in there and just being engaged and informing others. That's also another thing to factor in. And I think I definitely went too long in that, but here now, I think it'd be good for us to have a team discussion in terms of what are your experiences with these different ways of communicating, and what's it been like? What did you feel could that you would like to see more of?
I'm gonna jump in since we've already had just a very recent discussion in Slack regarding regarding PRs due to the merge that Zenzi and I did yesterday. I think overall, I've learned a lot regarding how all of these pieces work together, but keeping them straight as to which communication tool to use where is still, there's still a lot for me personally to sort out and to know which item to use when. It's because I mean, like in boot camp, we barely worked on those, especially PRs. PRs were just like this annoyance is what it boiled down to. Just like quick, click that button and get it going. So getting into the reviews has been really, really helpful. Understanding how to even comment on code. This whole like TCL time it's all been new for presenting that to me and how to get that workflow going. But it's maybe kind of a terrible thing to admit, but as a budding developer, I still like paper. And so when it comes to navigating between the different communication tools, it gets a little jumbled for me sometimes where I need like something concrete to look at. So at least in the beginning stages and learning it. So yeah, learning how they all work together is quite the experience, I will say.
Yeah, I think this is good where we're getting that practice, right? So here, make the mistakes, try the different things. We recognize that it is a lot of context switching and there's a lot of things to keep track of. But to have that experience here, then when you join the team, that there are all these potential things that need your attention. And then you can manage your time better when you get there, right? So it's just all the possibilities. And definitely, like, I think it's great that we're making mistakes here. It's a good way to learn and to know that we can do differently when it comes time.
And no one tool is like the right tool. You're going to join a team and they're going to use Jira, and then somebody's going to use, they're going to be like, no, we are hardcore GitHub users, so we're going to use project boards and issues. And then you'll find another team that uses, I don't know, Google Docs. So there's a lot of different tools. Andrew mentioned Coda earlier. If you're not as fortunate to have Notion, use Coda, and that hurt. Thanks for that. But yeah, there are a lot of different ways to skin the cat, and you're going to see different companies using different things, and you're going to like some of them and you're not. And so I get that at this stage it's confusing because there's a lot of different, you're just seeing this like wide world of tools, but just find what works for you and then also what works for your team. So in this case, we've chosen GitHub issues and the project boards here because it's one tool, it's in one place, it's kind of nice. But on I guess for the communicating with your peers, having that kind of async place to be able to go, like, I'm a paper person too, so I totally get that, Jessica. Like, I will write down all my notes. Like when I'm doing a code review, I will write those down on paper, because if I just start writing on an issue, like, I don't know, I accidentally close the tab and then I'm like, curse you, and that, or I lose lose track of what I'm doing, because for some reason me typing isn't as clear in my head as writing. So I'll write down the notes and then kind of transcribe them, and that way I'm actually doing a better job for my peers, because I'm not giving them a vomit of thoughts of whatever I've encountered. I'm kind of giving them the distilled bit of what, like, you know, I don't, maybe because oftentimes I'll write something down, I'll be like, this is an issue, this is a bug, and then I'll get further in the code review and be like, oh no, actually that makes sense, because I just hadn't gotten to a later bit of code that explained the whole bit. So yeah, anybody else have any thoughts on the presentation?
I'd love to hear from a couple of the developers in the team, like whether, I mean, Jessica, I love that you're kind of raising this is all new to you and everything. Is it, like I'm always curious, like what different boot camps do, you know, like it's, I taught at a boot camp a few years ago, and like we didn't do PRs either, you know. I was trying to like make it a pretty realistic experience, but other people, like was that your experience as well?
Yeah, no, at Flatiron, I mean, we did reviews for our projects, and we had to talk about our code, and but in terms of like a curriculum level process for learning how to write or maintain a PR or anything like that, there wasn't anything like that at all. So this process with the Collab Labs has been great. I'm, you know, much like Jessica, I think like for me, it's learning what tool is the best tool to communicate whatever, you know, we're dealing with. Like, is Slack the right, you know, is it more in, is this more of a PR thing? Do I go inside of where the issues are and leave a comment there? You know, I'm getting a feel for that too. It's getting a little bit, I mean, and I don't think like there's necessarily any rules necessarily, but figuring out what works best for everybody. And I think maybe, I think Skylar hinted at that, saying that, you know, it's probably just going to be different team to team, just getting kind of like, as long as everyone's sort of on the same page and the workflows, you know, kind of like understood by everybody. But it's still an interesting process, and definitely an important process. And when I first joined the Collab Lab, it did, and I think I mentioned this to maybe the other mentors, I was like really like blown away by how much time is actually just spent just talking about and documenting the code that you're writing, and so much less time actually coding. But I don't mind it, but it was a wake up call for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty realistic. And for what it's worth, my team at Zapier probably weekly talks about where we should be documenting things and like how we should be communicating. I mean, they don't, you know, even though we have all these tools at our disposal and things, it's a constant negotiation of like, oh, you know, now that we have, you know, 16 different meeting notes, like we need to move it to a different place. Like just like we're always talking about how to refine that stuff.
Right.
Anna or Zenzi, what was your experience like before Collab?
I didn't go to boot camps. So the experience I have is at my current job, and it's flawed. The communication part is definitely flawed. And the excuse I got is that, oh, it's because we're all remote now and we weren't before, so we're still getting used to it. But I think that's not necessarily true, because it's been a year, and a year is long enough to figure out how to do things. So I think it's just, it needs work. People try to do things over Slack, like most of the talk stays on Slack.
Yeah.
And I think that's because I work at a consulting firm, and right now the project I'm in, the client loves looking at everything. Like they just keep an eye on everything. So I noticed that the general instruction is like, okay, don't go too deep into what is wrong in your pull request, just do it over Slack, because we don't want to raise any flags. And I was like, that's iffy,
interesting.
But okay.
Yeah.
So that's the general instruction I have so far.
That's tricky, like kind of managing that client relationship there too.
Yeah, it's very tricky, because the client loves looking at everything that's going on all the time. They are in every meeting we have. They are in our daily stand-ups. They are in our retro. So it's complicated. But it's nice being here and actually seeing how it works when you can use all the tools that are available at the moment.
Yeah, and being remote, I mean, making that shift to remote, like it puts a real emphasis on just documentation and things, like having that stuff written down makes things so much easier. And if you're having conversations in Slack, it's actually harder because those conversations scroll away at some point, right? So it makes things a lot harder to keep track of. Senzi, you went to a boot camp, right? You went to trying to remember which one, but what was it like there? Like, how did you all communicate there?
We didn't really do a ton of communicating by using GitHub or any of the other tools in boot camp, but during my apprenticeship, I did a fair amount of communicating within the team. At Guru, it was interesting because they consider themselves a knowledge management platform. So because of that, everything was expected to be written and documented for later reference. And the kind of greatest sin that you could perpetuate would be to ask a question in Slack or in some other platform that already had a card, because all of the knowledge was kept within these cards. So all somebody would do is they would send you a link to the card, which was just kind of like a little smack on the hand. You're not really using the tool that we actually made. So that was what was used for onboarding, for setting up your dev environment, for things like that. But within code itself, the general life cycle would be that a support engineer would put something in a tool we had called Clubhouse, and we had a Clubhouse integration that linked with GitHub, so that we weren't necessarily writing the starting point for a pull request. It would already exist for the bug that we were trying to fix. And we would speak using the pull request, especially me, with a senior engineer, and nothing could be merged without a senior engineer's approval, passing the continuous integration checks, and passing Sonar, code smell, and security request. So it kind of made it easier for me, because you could be a little bit cavalier, because that code's not hitting production without going through like a lot of people and a lot of extra steps.
Yeah, we don't put a lot of emphasis on tests here, but that's a really good example of how testing actually allows you to go faster. You know, it's like, why does the car have brakes? It's so the car can go faster, because you have brakes to stop it. If you didn't have brakes, you'd have to inch along at 2 miles an hour. So in case you hit something, it wouldn't matter, right? So, but yeah, it just like that experience, what you're telling me, just shows like how there's so many different ways to do this stuff. You know, like all these different tools and different patterns that people come up with for how to do it effectively. And I can't remember who said it now, but like what, you know, it comes down to what works for the team. I realized we're over because I asked everybody to talk. So.
Yeah, let's move over to the issues, but it was really refreshing to get everybody's perspective on that. So thanks for motivating that, and thanks for everybody for feeling comfortable to chat. I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll go over this coming week's issues. Okay, bye, Yenli. Happy Mother's Day. Let's see. All right, everybody have my screen here? I'm gonna get rid of the meeting controls.
Yep.
All right, so we're getting close. We have 2 issues for this week per usual, and then next week we get to do a bunch of sweeping and get to kind of change gears and work on the CSS and the presentation of the app a little bit. But that's next week. Let's focus on this week. So our first user story is that as a user, I want to be able to delete items from my shopping list so that the list isn't cluttered with items I don't want to buy in the future. So let's look at it's possible, here, I'll make this bigger. It's possible our users may make an error, kind of obvious thing there, when entering an item, or they might decide at some point that they're not going to buy it and they want to get rid of it. So acceptance criteria, you're able to delete it from the shopping list. Before deleting it, you want to prompt the user, make sure they're really sure, so you don't have a bunch of things, you know, dropping away and I didn't mean to do that. And then deletion should cause the associated record in the database to be deleted. So we shouldn't orphan that record on the database. It should, our deletion activity shouldn't just affect our local, it should also push up, which I think is going to be pretty easy to do based on the way that we've modeled our data in the app. And if we look at, let's see, I've got a little wireframe here. Again, this isn't the way your app needs to look, but it's just a nice to have. So they've got a delete for each item, and then that should, you know, like it says, we discussed, it should pop up. Now, the one thing that's worth noting here is we always need to be careful about accessibility. And there's a few different ways to go about implementing delete. You should have some kind of pop-up, but there are a lot of accessibility issues when you're trying to do kind of like toasts or modals that pop up. And we've previously used for alerts, we've used the sweep alert. I've personally not vetted this, and I'm not super familiar with it, so I don't know its accessibility kind of characteristics. I did find that there's Sweet Alert 2. Don't know the relationship between these, but this one does say that it's accessible, but don't take my word for it. This is just something we should look into to ensure that, you know, example here that somebody who needs to navigate using the keyboard, that tabs will go to the buttons, and that a screen reader would be able to read the text in the buttons. So just be aware of what you're implementing and the implications of that. So maybe Sweet Alert has that. I gave it a cursory look, didn't see anything. But sometimes just like a plain JavaScript pop-up, it's sufficient there. So however you want to work that. And then going on to the next one, as a user, I need to get rid of your lovely faces so I can read. As a user, I want to view a list of my shopping list items in order of how soon I'm likely to need to buy each of the items, so that it's clear what I need to buy soon. So for example, Stacy's laid these out kind of nicely. I need to buy soon, need to buy kind of soon, need to buy not soon. So we've seen that from pretty early on, where when you create a new item, you kind of specify your initial state or your initial starting state. But now we have this bit where we're kind of dynamically weighting that based on the behavior of the user. And then there's this fourth one of inactive, and there's a nice little description of when there's only one purchase or the purchase is really out of date, we'll call it inactive. The acceptance criteria, items in the list are shown visually distinct. So with a different background color or line item, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do it. If we look a little carefully here, you can see, and this brings up our next point, there's green for, I guess, the best state. The next best state is orange. This is where it gets tricky. This one's, you know, a darker orange or a red, and then inactive, this particular mockup is showing it as gray. So use it as visually distinct, or set it to be visually distinct according to how soon the item's expected to be bought again. Items, I'm going to skip ahead here. Items in different states should be described distinctly when read by a screen reader. And that's kind of like, you can think about accessibility here. Why is that important? Well, a lot of people have color blindness. I'm not personally colorblind, but I didn't realize until I zoomed in that these were two different colors. So that kind of highlights there's probably a better way to show these things as distinct. Just something to think. So use an ARIA label to denote how soon the user will need to buy the item in addition to the visual indicator. And then, you know, maybe there's some better way to do this even for people who are sighted to be able to do that. So going back here, items should be sorted by the estimated number of days until the next purchase. So in this case, like we talked about the various item states, we'll be able to go similar to the filter that we have right now and that we worked on last week, where you filter based on the text. Instead of filtering, we can sort by. So you can sort by something. In this case, we want to probably sort by that new estimate that we're generating since last week, so that the most frequently needing to buy it soon items are at the top, and then it kind of categorizes, it goes down. Item with the same number of estimated days until next purchase should be sorted alphabetically. Okay, so what does that tell us? That tells us that we're going to be sorting by one thing, and then we're going to be sorting by another thing. So there's going to be some kind of sorting by multiple parameters, and there's a few different ways to do that, but I think JavaScript makes it pretty easy for us. So there's a little more to consider here, but it's not, I wouldn't call it necessarily more complicated. It's just something that before you dive in and write code, again, kind of rationalize, like, okay, what needs to happen here? What are the, like we talked about last week, like how can we break this down into small chunks? We have all the data we need. We just need to write some logic to be able to sort. Yeah, does anybody have questions on either of these issues? To review again, this one's the number 11's for deleting items. And then number 2 is going to be for sorting the items and creating some kind of visual indicator of that sort.
Just a quick note for this one, because I think my group initially, since it says things that are in the same number of days to have sorted alphabetically, but within like each group, like let's say the green group, that there could be different, like some chocolate chips are every 2 days and bananas every 2 days, but then milk is every 6 days. So you would have some things alphabetical, but am I making sense? Sorry. Anyway, what I think we ended up doing is just within each group, like within the green group, sort alphabetically within the, so not exactly within the exact number of days, but within the number of days group, we sorted alphabetically.
That's how I was understanding it. Yeah, so that's good to hear.
That's what I would do too.
Is that anti though, Andrew?
Oh, I mean, that's a product decision. So you all as a team can decide that for sure. What you think the best experience is. The other thing is that there, like some teams, teams kind of go back and forth on this inactive state as well. Like some teams only have it inactive if it's a long time, as like double the time has elapsed, whereas others like take to heart that, you know, if you add it but you haven't purchased it yet, then it should also be inactive, like until you make your first purchase. So that one can kind of go either way. I mean, sometimes that comes down to how you have it set up when you add your item in the first place. Is that considered a purchase or not? So, you know, sometimes you'll be able to add things to your list, but you don't have any purchases recorded. Sometimes adding it is the first purchase. So that decision kind of informs this last that inactive state, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I guess if you buy something every like half day, maybe you'd want that at the very top, even if it starts with Z. So I don't know, maybe you guys have a different idea.
Yeah, so again, kind of try to, before diving into the code with your group, try to seek consensus on how you want to approach it. And it's pretty freeform. Just get consensus before going off and implement.
Right.
All right, so as far as groups this week, if I'm correct, we've got James and Jessica. And yeah, I guess, does anybody, let's see, let's get to the board here. I moved 9 and 10 over here. I guess who picked first last week, or does anybody have any strong preference?
I'd rather do issue 11 because the sorting one has way too much interpretation, and I don't want to go for that one.
That's okay, because I'd rather do, since I sort of flubbed the date time stuff, I'd like to be able to kind of like own fixing that. So
I'm fine with everything. Yeah, I'm fine with James. Yeah, us doing issue 12. That's cool.
would this be a good point to just try to incorporate that package, Sky, and just sort of refactor from here?
Which package are we talking about? The time,
date,
or
like the time one? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that I would say that when we were discussing that, when Yunli brought that up, I wasn't prescriptive, go and install this thing.
Okay.
It's very much up to you. This could be, as you know, without looking at the code, so again, don't take this as gospel. You can just convert that time to number of days.
Yeah.
So instead of multiplying by that,
Right.
that integer that gives you the number of milliseconds, you could everywhere else you could convert. Anytime you get a result that's giving you milliseconds, you can just divide that or bring it down to days.
Okay.
And that way you would avoid any kind of dependency. Now, I can't speak for Yenli, but maybe there'd be a good reason to bring in, maybe that would simplify things, but certainly avoid bringing in a dependency if it's just because somebody else said. If it helps you achieve the job, by all means, go for it. Maybe that'd be a good, so again, kind of going back to developer tools, like Slack this isn't like an issue. This isn't some grand thing. This is something where we have like a little learning, like, hey, Yenli, what do you mean by that? Maybe Slack would be a good thing. The thread and ping Yenli and ask what dependency she was referring to. And because like, I don't know, I would just probably.
But definitely get it to the AC. Right, like definitely update the AC to get the last week's AC correct. So having and having everything as days.
Because I was understanding, since that pull request has already been closed, even though it maybe technically shouldn't have, are we supposed to create another little PR to address it?
And I talked with Yenli a little bit about this. What I think would be best would be to create an issue. So one of us creates an issue, and usually, trying to simulate what would happen in industry would be like the person who's most familiar with the issue. So maybe in that case, it would be Yenli and I might create an issue like, oh, doesn't meet the acceptance criteria because of this. Here's an example of, and that would, then we have a conversation. So somebody creates an issue with details, sufficient details. So, and it's async, so everybody can go and read it and understand it, and then follow-up questions in that thread, and we figure out a solution and make the fix. Now, we want to make sure we don't go over 5 hours. We're not trying to throw any extra work at anybody here, but it sounds like some people here are interested in learning and just getting that thing fixed up. So I would say, yeah, long story short, let's do a different branch and merge that fix separate from this week's work.
Okay.
But this is a democracy.
I like that. I like that. It'd be more of a separate issue than, like, I wouldn't try to roll it into this coming PR, because it's like a different thing, and more like a remediation. But the other thing, like, we've had lots of teams where like they didn't get through, like they didn't finish the issue in a week or something, and so the team just adjusts and you carry it over to the next week. So we don't have to do it's 11 and 12 this week necessarily, right? Like the last 2 weeks of the program are more design oriented. You could push that sorting issue out by a week and try to address this issue this week. Like kind of a refactor of that date time stuff. Or if you get it done really quickly, then pull in the issue or something. Like it's the team can kind of just adjust based on capacity and kind of the group's feeling of how important it is to fix this.
That's good. I didn't personally realize that we could be that flexible on when we're getting our work done. I guess we do have a bit of flex time since we only have that one issue next week.
Yeah, I mean, it leaves less time to get through the design work, but it's totally possible to do. Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay, well, let's see. We're 20 minutes over. Let's bang this out. So on issue number 11, for the deleting the items, from what I remember, Anna and Zenzi, you're going to take that?
Yes, my broken English really appreciates it.
I still don't see what you mean when you say stuff like that, Anna. I really don't.
Hard to say. And there we go. Sounds good. So those are assigned. We'll move these to in progress. Just as a quick reminder, we've got this refactor and miss opportunities. Didn't we finish that one up?
I don't recall if it got finished up. I remember the last thing I remember was realizing I needed to ask you if that's how it was supposed to be set up in that column to be able to be addressed. So I let that slack by mistake, sorry.
And you know, sometimes you try something and it doesn't stick. Like in this case, in one of our previous meetings, we're like, hey, let's toss things in here. Well, if it doesn't get used, if it's not the right format, if we shouldn't feel bad that we didn't do that. But for instance, when like I'll create the issue with Yenli for this, with our understanding of the timestamp problem, and we'll categorize it here. We'll put it in here. But we'll also know that it exists from Slack and conversations, et cetera. I don't think that's going to be an issue. Anybody else have any other thoughts, questions, criticisms? What are you doing for Mother's Day? Talk to your mamas if you got them. Okay. All right. Well, we're over time. So see you on the Slacks, and have a lovely week.